everyone, and welcome to Everything EFL. My name is Erin. Today, I have a guest who I'm very excited about. I discovered her on Instagram, and I immediately liked her positive and uplifting attitude towards education and challenging the narrative of some aspects of history. Now, she has a viewpoint and experiences that, as a white educator and member of society, I don't. So this is why we're talking today. I hope this conversation will highlight some of the underlying issues in education and give other teachers some inspiration. So from San Francisco, Anjalee Beverly. How are you, Anjalee?
I'm doing well. So nice to see you, and so grateful that you invited me to be on your podcast. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Okay, so can you just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Anjalee Beverly. I teach fourth grade, which means I teach all subjects. I'm in a self-contained classroom. I love doing project-based learning. I'm the project-based learning coordinator at my school. I'm the lead mentor teacher at my school. And I'm also the founder of our African American Parent Advisory Council. I believe you wanted to know the demographics of my school. You had asked me before. So my school is 75% Latinx, 10% African American, 10% Asian Pacific Islander, and 5% Caucasian.
Okay, so a good mix. Would that be typical for your area?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I just want to start with your background. What was your education like in terms of understanding and learning about the position of people of color in America? And do you think it's changed much?
Well, my background in K through 12th, I never learned really anything positive about African American heritage or about Latinx heritage or Asian. I mean, I didn't learn anything about any other culture that was necessarily positive. In my K through 12th, the only time I learned about African Americans was brought up in the context of slavery. It was brought up in the context of trauma. And it was typically when we were doing our Civil War or Reconstruction era that would got weaved in there about how the war was about these things. It was really the only time African American heritage was brought up. As I got older, some teachers started to implement teaching us about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, and that was it. Those are the only two. And so it wasn't until I got to college that I began to learn more about people who look like me in other cultures as well. And the school I went to growing up was predominantly African American, Latinx, and Asian. And Asian as in like Hmong and Laotian.
Yeah.
So that was predominantly the makeup of my school, but we never learned about ourselves in history books or from our teachers.
So it was just a passing mention more than anything else. Did you
Yes.
have like a sort of an aha moment when you realized you weren't being represented in terms of history and society at school?
Not in K through 12. I didn't know to ask that question. I didn't know. I looked at my teachers as being right. I really wanted to be a great student. So I just did whatever I was asked to do. I'm a student who literally I graduated with a 3.9 from college and graduated. Sorry, it was a 4 point. What was it? It was like a 4.1 in high school, 3.9 from college, 4.0 with my master's. So I was always a student who like really wanted to work hard. Graduated cum laude, and so when I graduated with all these high honors, I'm thinking back on in my schooling, I wanted to please my teachers so much, but they never really taught me the truth about myself. So my aha moment wasn't until I took an Africana Studies class in college. And there was it was an article that the teacher had assigned us. And I was like, I've never learned any of this. And I did really well in school. Like I did really well. I did everything my teachers asked me to do, got really good grades. And I've never learned any of these things from my teachers. And so it was difficult for me because I thought I had built these strong bonds with them, and it made me feel a little betrayed, like they hadn't taught me the truth. But then it also made me very hungry to learn more. And although I went into college with a degree, with the pursuit of pursuing, or with the idea of pursuing an education or English degree, I ended up getting a double bachelor's in African studies because I was so excited about learning about my heritage.
That's amazing. So you told me in our conversation a couple of weeks ago that you have a freer reign than most teachers do in terms of what you can actually teach. Um, in terms of sort of possibly problematic history lessons, what advice would you give teachers who don't have as much of a choice of what to teach? And I'm asking this question because I was thinking of, you had an Instagram post with 4 questions about whose perspective is being focused on, who does the narrative benefit, whose voice is missing, how might a different group tell this story? So that kind of inspired me to ask this question.
That's it's so funny that you said that, because I was actually going to refer to that. I want to just first say, so I teach at a public charter school. A public charter school means that we still need to adhere to district policies. We still must follow California Common Core state standards. We are given a lot of curriculum. And the only reason why it might be a little bit more freedom is because we can choose which of the curriculum we're going to use and how we're going to use it. Now, if you're a teacher who's working at a school where you have a set curriculum and you have to use that curriculum, I always say, number one, like, know your standards. That's like the first thing I think of, even being like really being a great educator, is you really need to know your standards. That's step one.
What do you mean by that?
Know your standards.
Maybe standards has a slightly different meaning in an American educational context.
Oh, okay. So here, Common Core state standards, I wish I could even like share my screen and show it to you. But a Common Core state standard is a student needs to know how to retell a text. Okay. A student needs to know how to write informational writing. And there are numbers that go along with it.
So they're probably called slightly different things, but I get it. I get it, definitely. Okay, so know your standards.
I wonder what they're called.
It could be the
know
same
your
thing.
Standards are in essentially know what your students are supposed to know by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So be very clear about what it is your students need to know at the end of the year. The second step is find out how much flexibility you do have, because you want to maintain your job, and you want to know how much flexibility you do have in freeing the reins. And then 3, you want to choose, what I like to do is, if you're worried about teaching a topic that might be difficult for you or that you're not well versed in, is to get a mentor text. And a mentor text is a book that supports what you're teaching. Get a book to talk for you. If you get a book to talk for you, so maybe it's a book that is on African American heritage, maybe it's a book about Filipino heritage, or maybe I don't know what type of topics may be difficult for some people, but I know when it comes to culture, a lot of teachers tiptoe around, how do I teach about other cultures? And if that's difficult, get a book, grab a book, use that book to not only read it and expose your students to other cultures, but also you can use that book to teach your standards. You can ask students to respond to the text using that book. You can ask your class to do a reading response. You can ask them to summarize. You can ask them to infer. You can ask them to do all of the things that we need them to do at the end of the year using that book. And so the thing is you're not, oh, I'm sorry, what did you say?
No, I just said, yeah.
Yeah, you can, and it doesn't have to be a book the whole class gets. A mentor text could just be one book that you decide to read as a whole class, read aloud, and you could be working on that book for a whole week.
Yeah.
I like to start with KWL charts. What do you want to know? What do we want to, what wonderings do we have? And what do we actually learn at the very end? And so we can use that book to guide that whole conversation. You're still in alignment with your standards. You haven't had to like go too far out of your box of, oh, I don't really know how to teach that. It's okay. You're gonna let the book do it for you. So those are my top, I think I said 3 things. So know your standards, find out how much flexibility you have, use a mentor's text. Oh, my last one is be sure to ask the questions that you mentioned. I actually put them on a slide so I can look at them. Be sure to ask these questions. And I highly recommend you go find me on Instagram, Miss Cleverly Beverly. And I have these questions posted. Whose perspective is being focused on? This could be within any history lesson that you're teaching. Think about whose perspective, who's telling the story, who's benefiting from the story, whose voice is missing. And then you can kind of break your class up into the different voices. This group, you all are going to be the explorers slash colonists. This side, you're going to be the Native Americans, indigenous people. This side, you're going to be just the people on the outside looking in. Like if you devise it in this way, or if you plan it in this way, it will allow you to support your students in being critical thinkers. And that's what we want to do. We want to support them in being critical thinkers. I'm talking a lot, huh?
Okay, that's why you're here.
You want to support them in being critical thinkers. You want to give them agency, and you want them to question, but you also want them to know how to retell, how to respond, how to infer. You want them to be able to do all of those things. So you can do that with the book.
Excellent. You're all right.
It's so funny. I'm used to asking the questions. So for me to answer them, it feels like, oh my God, I'm rambling.
That's but no, you're not. Everything you're saying has relevance and perspective, and it's great what you're saying. It's like that was brilliant advice, like especially for a new teacher, you know, who's still trying to find their way. I think that's really, really good advice. So did you say you took 4th grade? What age is that?
9 turning 10.
9 turning 10.
They start off with me at 9, and by the end of the year, they're usually 10.
They're 10. Does politics have a place in lessons for students that young? Like, does it sort of come up?
You know, it doesn't, it's not a part of a standard. And so I do try to stick with my standards. So it does not come up in my class. However, like this past election and in the election in 2016, it's the only time I've experienced politics come into my school. So the 2016 election and this past election, and that's because the implications of who our America's current president is now and was about to be elected, it caused a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety for the populations that I serve. I serve, like I said, predominantly Latinx, and the term Latinx, just to break that down, typically we say Latino or Latina, and to support the inclusivity of all genders, it's Latinx. I predominantly serve children who come from Mexico, Central America, and South America, and it's typically, I don't want to say it's typically, but they felt from what my students, I'm just talking about my students, expressed fear and expressed anxiety. And because I'm a holistic teacher, their fear and anxiety became mine, and I wanted to support them. And so I did open a space up for, let's talk about how you feel.
You say that this fear and anxiety came about this year and 4 years ago. Was it that the students came to school asking you questions, or just expressing their anxiety, or both?
Both. And some didn't come to school. Some were afraid to come to school. Some were too sad to come to school. There were tears, actual tears of fear of losing family members, fear of what it meant to have someone who outright fear. I just want to say that they expressed fear, they expressed anxiety through their words, not so much questions, because they kind of know that I'm not going to tell you what to think or who to vote for or anything. It's more so, how are you feeling? I can tell that this is happening. And then that's when it came out. Okay. I feel this way because of this. Wow. Or some were just sharing voluntarily. I didn't have to ask. Yeah. You could tell children listen to their parents, and they would kind of mutter the same thing that their parents would say, and we'd have to have a conversation about how we're not going to decide who isn't being voted for in my class right now. We're not going to make people feel bad for their decisions, because of course there might be others in class who feel differently. And so I didn't want to create that environment in my classroom. It's
just so sad, like kids that age having that anxiety. Really, it's heartbreaking.
It was very different for me. It was I've never experienced anything like that. It taught me something as an educator, how to respond to students in need, in a different type of need, in a worry. Their worry wasn't something I could fix. I couldn't put a Band-Aid. I couldn't tell them to go to the peace corner. I couldn't just sit with them and talk and have lunch bunch. It was a deep rooted worry that they were going to go home with. So that was difficult. It's still difficult. I think that they feel better now. But yeah.
Okay.
To answer your question, we don't really talk about politics, but we do talk about feelings.
Okay. So you said you created like a space for your students to share their experiences. How has that changed now that you're teaching online?
Oh, that's a great question. So we still do community circles. So the space that there's two spaces when we were in person. One space was the peace corner, or I called it the calm space. Everyone calls it the peace corner. So I wanted something different. I call it the calm space. And it would have, we made these lava lamps with water bottles, and I put all these sensory things in there, little frilly things you can touch. And I put coloring pages and crayons. And they would go there to get calm. And there was a little iPad, so they could, not iPad, iPod, so they could listen to music and get calm. That was one way. And then we also would have a community circle in the morning time just to check in with how we felt. That was in the physical space. Now in the virtual space, I created a Bitmoji digital calm space. So now they can go to the Bitmoji classroom and they can still, I have like a video of me doing a breathing ball. I have a guided meditation, I have some affirmations. So everyone has access to the Bitmoji calm space. And then there's also every single Friday, we do a very extended community circle. And I'll ask different questions. It's very social emotional, but it's, how are you feeling today? That's the first beginning. And it could start off just in the chat. And then it might be, what would you do if? And so then I'm able to ask them these what would you do questions. And sometimes I use these, I have these old table topics cards. I'm looking at it right now, actually. What's your earliest memory as a little kid? Right? It's so funny because they are little kids, but they really think that they don't realize they're little kids. So they'll say, when I was little, I'm like, you're already little. But these types of questions will really get them talking if I have a
Yeah,
silent group. But most times they're just ready to talk and share about how they're feeling.
nice. They obviously feel comfortable within your classroom environment, which speaks volumes to you as a teacher. Did you make the meditation guides yourself?
So
Because
which one?
you said they have meditation guides in the.
No, I didn't. I only one I created myself was my breathing ball. I would go grab it, but I think it's going to make everything sound all shaky. But my breathing ball is the only thing. I did a video with, we're going to inhale when the ball goes out, when it expands, and exhale. Wait, did I say that right? When the ball expands, we inhale, and then we exhale when the ball gets smaller. I might grab it at some point. I don't want to mess up the sound here, but that's the only video I made. The guided
Okay.
meditation I found on, was it the Calm app? It was from YouTube actually,
Okay.
but no, it wasn't mine.
Because I was going to say, like, if you ever want to give up your career as a teacher, you could probably do meditation guides or bedtime stories because you just have that voice that's really soothing and
Really?
calm. Oh God, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, I really appreciate that.
Okay. So when we chatted a couple of weeks ago, you made a very interesting point. And again, it's just something that never really entered my sphere of thinking, but you mentioned experiences of being villainized at school. And can you first of all just explain briefly what that means for the listeners?
Villainized, the term that I used is, I mean, there's a lot of books out right now about how Black children are villainized in schools. I was villainized in schools as a child. It's very hurtful to think that I was, my family and trusted people to care for me, but instead I was treated like a problem when all I did was get good grades and listen to my teachers. But just on the basis of what I look like, it was, you're automatically the problem. I want to recommend a book called Pushout, and it's the criminalization of Black girls in schools. I highly recommend that one, and just what happens to Black girls when they're in school. But villainized, the term I'm using is to be treated, I want to say to be wrongly treated like you've done something, like to be wrongly treated like you've done something wrong. And I don't know how it sounds so weird, but without even giving the person an opportunity to show themselves, they've already been deemed as a bad guy. And that's why I use the word villainized. And then, the author of Pushout, whose name I can't remember right now, the criminalization, that also speaks to, if we look at detention records, it is, although let's not talk about my school. If we look at the majority of schools that have a high percentage of African American children, that have a low percentage of African American children, they still have the highest rate of detention. So I'll say it again because I was a little choppy. We can, if we were to look at the data, and I've done this data, this is what I've done my thesis on. If we look at the data, we can look at the schools with the lowest percentage of African American children in population, but yet they have the highest percentage of detention.
Yeah. That's
villainization. That's preparing them for, that's even criminalization, because now we're talking about the school to prison pipeline. When we start not trying to figure out other ways to connect with children. So if you're the lowest population in the school, why are you the most in detention? Let's think about that. Is it a cultural difference? Is it because we don't understand how to relate? Is it not understanding different ways to provide other forms of discipline? How do we start implementing social justice? What is social justice? These are all things that have to be, I think, really talked about and discussed, because the school to prison pipeline is a very real thing. And I think people don't realize how they buy into it. Even with the whole, I know this sounds hard for people to hear, but, and it's probably very different where you're from, but here, the standing in the line with your arms really straight and you can't move, where does that come from? Why do we need our kids to do that? Why do we need and I've explained to my students, like, I would like you all to be in your line order. It isn't always going to be a perfect straight line, but I need you to be in your line order, because if there's ever a fire drill, I need to be able to find you quickly. So I give them reasonings as to why, but not, I need you to stand in line with your hands behind your back, super duper straight, like you're a soldier or a prisoner. That's not what I need from you. It doesn't support any of us.
So what can or should white teachers be doing to change their attitude to students of color? Or have you already answered that question with all of the questions that should be asked to avoid Black students being villainized?
That it's not, I want to say it's not just white teachers. It's not just white teachers. There's a lot of teachers, because so I don't want to get so deep on your podcast, but whiteness is a whole culture. Like people might see you and say that you're white, but you're actually English, right?
Yeah.
And I believe your husband might be considered white, but he's actually Irish, right? Sorry, I'm getting all
which is the whitest of the white.
But so I guess what my point is what I've been learning. I have a close colleague who she's a close colleague who I can't remember where she's from, but she was telling me the history of her family, and that when they came here, they changed their last name so that it sounded white. They didn't want their last name to sound, I want to say, Italian. Yeah, she's Italian. She didn't want the last name to sound Italian. So in order to buy into the culture of whiteness, they changed their name. And so whiteness was created. It's not like anyone, I think, could buy into the culture of whiteness. I think that a person who looks Asian, or a person who even looks Black, or a person who looks Latino, Latinx, like, you can look that way, but if you're buying into the culture of whiteness, then you still need to be retaught. You still need to relearn how to interact with children, because we've been taught. It's like ingrained in us. It's ingrained in us to think, oh, well, this type of behavior, it means this. If you are, shouting out, it means this. And it's a part of schooling, but I also think that it's a part of this culture of blend in. Don't be heard. Speak softly. You shouldn't be shouting out. And so that's a whole different little topic that we don't have to get into right now. But my point in saying that is, I think that what I want to offer is not to white teachers, it's to anyone who is buying into the culture of whiteness. And it could be anyone. So what could happen? What can you do is get to learn your students' cultures, just period.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Learn your students' cultures, literally figure out what culture each of them are from. And then make sure you get books. Get some books that represent all of your students. So if your student is from Ireland, get some books from Ireland. If your student is from the Pacific Islands, go get some books. Get some books and make sure that they're represented in your class. If you can't find the books, ask people. Do a Google search. You want to make sure you have a library that represents your students. 2, get to know their culture, and you can get to know their culture by really check into their funds of knowledge. You can have them be experts in the class. You can have them explain their culture. You can have their parents come in and You can have your parents and have their parents teach about the culture. And then that way students are learning all about culture. And again, remember to connect it to standards. You have to, I
Yeah.
cannot, I just, I'm a big standard person. So yes, you can do all these things about culture, but your kids still need to be able to critically think.
Yeah.
They still need to be able to add, subtract, multiply. They need to be able to do all those things. So make sure you're still connecting it to your standards. And again, the standards, what I mean by standards are, we have actual state, state, how do I call it? Almost mandates or policies of what students have to learn by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Make sure you're in alignment with those. So I think I said it, figure out learn their culture, get a library, a classroom library that represents their culture, learn their culture by checking into their funds of knowledge, asking students to be experts, asking their family members to be experts, and explore their neighborhoods. If you don't live in their neighborhoods, go explore their neighborhoods. If they speak a different language, learn a few words from their language and ask them to teach you.
Yeah.
Ask them to teach you some words. You can make a jam board. If you're virtual, you can make a jam board of everybody. How do we say hi in these different cultures? In these cultures? How do we say hi in these different languages? How do we say you're welcome in these different languages?
Yeah.
In this way, we're learning, we're building community. They're typing, they're writing. It could
Communicating.
be, yes, and it could become a lesson teaching about verbs, right? Use a verb to tell me one thing about what you did this weekend, or one thing you did. What's one cultural thing that you enjoy doing? Give me a verb.
Yeah.
It could
It's not
be
rocket
that.
science, you know. It's not. It's so simple. When you put it like that, it's very simple. But I mean, I assume that not everybody's doing it. You know.
I don't think people knew to do it. I
Yeah.
genuinely, even when I think of my past educators who I wish I could, say a few things to now, they didn't
Yeah.
know.
No.
We don't know
No.
what we don't know. I genuinely think,
Yeah.
I think that education with social media, with what's going on in the world, I think teachers are stepping up to the plate. I do think that there's a people are now listening to people of color. That's another
Yeah.
thing. People are now listening to people of color. And I want to be very clear. When I say people of color, there's a term called BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, POC, people of color. So we want to be very clear that it is inclusive of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color represent everyone who's not considered Caucasian. And people are listening to our voices more. And I think because people are listening, they're realizing, wow,
Yeah.
whoa, so this is what education's been doing. Whoa, I don't want to do that to my students. And teachers are listening now. So I want to genuinely think that teachers didn't mean harm in the past. I don't think they mean harm now. I think they genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
But as educators, we took on this job to be an educator. We chose to take on this profession, which means we have to be in a constant state of learning, and that requires us to include our students narratives in what we teach.
So
Period.
do you predict a bit of a shift in the educational system of the US, or maybe just in certain pockets of the USA? Do you think it will be a lasting shift?
It's a good question. um, it's funny enough, I'm not well traveled in the US. I'm well traveled outside of the US. So just based really on Instagram and the people that I've connected with there, that can I really speak to this? I do think certain pockets, there might be a shift in certain pockets. And I think we can even see that when we look at our election map. We can
Yeah.
see, I don't know if you've seen that, but looking at our election map, we can kind of see which people are ready for change,
Yeah.
which folks are more open to teaching real, true history, and not just a history that only includes one voice, and not just a history. And I keep saying history because so much is built on history, where our mathematics even come from, how we are teaching language. When we get into root words, we have to get into history.
Yeah.
So it's so I do think that a shift can happen. I do think a shift will happen. Do I think it will happen nationally in America? I don't know.
No. I mean, like the last 4 years, I think, like the last year, I think that, like you say, people are more willing to listen to other people's voices. But I think the last 4 years, and this is just my opinion, I'm not an expert, but I think some people have shifted further to the right as well. So there's still quite a division, I think. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
You know, I think, like I said, the election map, I think, kind of told me everything. I think many of us were kind of hoping that that the past 4 years would be people shifting more toward we need change.
Yeah.
But then kind of seeing how close our election was, it lets me know that there are some people who are quite okay with how things are.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you inspire your students to believe in themselves?
Oh, I love that question.
You just seem like the kind of teacher who would do that. So that's why I asked.
So the very first day, they learned our class affirmation. And I wish I had it pulled up. I want to like pull it up. I probably could find it really quick, but I teach them our class affirmation. I'm gonna like find it, but as I talk, I'll find it. But I teach them our class affirmation. And then after I teach them the class affirmation, we learn about the importance of affirmations and why affirmations are so important. And I have them create their own. They just one sentence, create your own affirmation, and they get to tape it to, I'm looking for the affirmation right now. They get to tape it to their desk. And then they also make a big one, really colorful, and I hang it up in the classroom. And so everyone gets to see the affirmation. So I am smart. I am a hard worker. I can do hard things. I try new things every day. I learn from my mistakes. When I struggle, I grow. This is the best part. My brain can stretch and I never give up. And I never give up. And I never give up because I get better every day. So we do that every morning, whether we're physical in class or we're virtual. We are standing, we are saying it loud and proud, and the kids love it.
Can I just say, if you're listening to this and you're not watching it on IGTV, go on IGTV and watch this, because the way she just did that was brilliant. You have to see it rather than just hear it.
Doing it.
That's so nice.
Oh, my students do it so much better than me. They do it. Oh, it's so cute. On my Instagram, I actually have one of my students recorded doing it because her voice is so cute. So yes, I provide them with the class affirmation, and I got that from my 6th grade teacher, Miss White. She had us do a class affirmation, and I actually found her my 3rd year of teaching, and I was like, "Can you send me the class affirmation that we used to do? Because I love it. And I want to do it with my class." And I don't know if I gave her the wrong email, but I never got it from her, so I had to just create my own. So they create their affirmation. I create a classroom library full of books that reflect and represent them. And I let them be experts in the classroom. So if we're teaching math, after I've taught a lesson several times, it's time for them to start teaching it. So I'll have them come to the class, and they're excited to do it. I never call on people who aren't comfortable. Like, I'm not gonna, if you're a person if you know you have social anxiety, or if you know you don't like being in front of the class, I won't do that. But if there are students who are like, oh my God, I want to come up, those are the ones that'll come up. They get to share how to teach a lesson, and pretty soon that gets them more comfortable sharing how they feel. So I have them also share their experiences, share how they feel. We might have points in class where it's like, you know what, let's talk about how we're feeling, especially in Socratic seminars. Okay, yeah, I think I said it all. Affirmations, mentor text. Well, I get not mentor text, but a classroom library that reflects them. I have them, I tap into their funds of knowledge and let them share their own experiences and let them be experts.
Lovely. Very nice indeed. Very sage advice there. Final question. What do you do to stay positive and to keep your mental health in good condition?
I actually I wrote this one down. I was like, I want to say it all. I read lots of books. And if I'm not physically reading them, I like to take really long walks. One of my favorite things is either taking a long walk or a long jog and listening to an Audible, or listening to a podcast. And I've listened to all of Oprah's Audibles. I've listened to all of, what is the woman's name? I'm blanking on her name. Marianne Williamson. I listen to a lot of those types of podcasts and Audible books that like really feed and fuel me. I have a really solid morning routine. I like to wake up, I meditate, I exercise. I like to always have a cup of tea and water near me.
He's
I
good.
think I'm looking at the one about educating myself now that I think about it. And talking to my nana, I talk to my friends, and playing with my puppy.
So, yeah, look, this conversation's been really, for me, it's been very enlightening, very informative. Um, I've learned a lot talking to you, and I think anybody listening will have too. I think you've said some really, really interesting things, given some brilliant, practical, simple advice, which is the main thing, I think. I mean, I think teachers are already quite overloaded as it is, but I think everything you've
Mhm,
said has been
mhm.
very kind of just really good practical advice. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and sharing your experiences. And where can people find you on social media, just in case they didn't get it?
They can find me on Miss, so ms.cleverly.beverly. You can find me on Instagram. That's kind of the only social media I have. And I want to just thank you so much for having me here. I truly appreciate it. And yeah, teachers, I hope you enjoy. Everybody watching, educate yourself.
Okay, thank you. So everybody, you can follow and subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And don't forget to tell a colleague about us and share the love. Bye, everyone.
Bye.